The Internet of Things is poised to rapidly proliferate as we continue to embed connectivity into more and more everyday items. The resulting explosion of data and new attack vectors will put increased pressures on cybersecurity. These pressures will require creative solutions that enable the business to innovate while protecting itself from cyber criminals. As the world becomes more interconnected, security will increasingly need to be considered at each phase of the development process. It can no longer be an afterthought. Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we feature resilient leaders, real insights, and unfiltered stories. My name is Deb Golden, and I'm the U.S. leader of Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory's Cyber and Strategic Risk Services practice. As part of our cyber series, I have the pleasure of speaking with Debbie Wheeler, Vice President and CISO at Delta Airlines. In this episode, Debbie shares her perspective and experience on how to evangelize cybersecurity across the organization and translate technology goals into business objectives. We also discuss the interconnectivity of today's world and its impact on cybersecurity. I thoroughly enjoyed learning all about Debbie. She is a true proponent of developing the next generation of cyber talent, and I love hearing how excited she gets when she talks about helping these individuals, particularly our young women in cybersecurity, to follow in her footsteps. Without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Debbie Wheeler. Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, Debbie. I'm so excited to have you here. I know we've talked a little bit before getting into this podcast, and you've brought up how you and your husband have been a bit nomadic, moving around the country while raising 4 kids. So maybe a little bit to talk about first as we get to know you a little bit more. Maybe a quick snippet on, things that maybe you might have learned or taken away from your experience of moving around so frequently, because I think particularly now in pandemic days when we're all kind of harbored in our own homes, being nomadic might sound like something that happened so long ago, but maybe a couple of tips and tricks or things that you learned from being around the country so often.
Sure. Well, first of all, Deborah, thank you for having me this morning. I think, quite frankly, moving around has made me, in fact, resilient. You have to adapt and adjust to new places, new people, finding new doctors, new schools. So you do have to have a level of resiliency. Our moves were primarily instigated by job changes that my husband or I decided to undertake. It was fun. It was challenging. I think at this point in my life, I can safely say I am ready to just settle in one space and stay there. And hopefully, Georgia will be it for us.
Well, that sounds exciting. I know I definitely agree. It provides a level of resilience because the amount that you have to adapt to, let alone your children, when you think about what they have to adapt to as well, it certainly is a lot to work through, but it's also a lot of new opportunities. So it's exciting to hear your energy behind it, but I also can empathize that you're probably ready to, maybe stick in one spot for a little bit. And you said the words resilient, and I'm going to share that obviously just, one extra time when we think about resilience, in addition to all the moving. You've been described as being a resilient leader, both as a 2-time cancer survivor, obviously what we just talked about with your moving, working parent. And I'll focus a little bit on obviously being a leader in a male-dominated industry. And so your persistence and ability to juggle multiple competing priorities when we think about all the things that are going on in the world, let alone being the CISO at Delta, you're a true inspiration. Do you have any tips and tricks from that perspective when you think about, what's helped you gain strength on a day-to-day basis and candidly enabled your brand?
I think first and foremost, listening to my team, listening to others around me, whether it's listening for feedback they have to offer, listening to understand what they might be going through. But I think first and foremost, listening is a very important skill in being a resilient leader. I think the second skill is empathy. Everyone experiences change differently. And I think this past year is a great example of how people's lives have been upended, and everyone has experienced this pandemic to a different extent or in a different way. So I think having empathy for what others are going through helps you to be a resilient leader. And then lastly, trying to be positive, trying to find the silver lining in the cloud, so to speak, or making lemonade out of lemons, whatever analogy you want to use. But I think trying to be positive, maintain a positive outlook and a positive perspective has helped with being a resilient leader as well.
And that's not always easy, right? I mean, trying to find the positive in maybe some of the most trying times. And so as you think about our listeners and as they're thinking about perhaps their own trying times right now, is there anything, that you've done, a 1 minute meditation, listening to a funny story, surrounding yourself by good people, what's something that you do both from a kind of like a mental and well-being perspective that helps you stay positive?
I get outside every opportunity I can. Quite frankly, that is what helps my mood, helps my wellness, helps me to stay positive is trying to be outside, get outside. So taking a walk over the lunch break or when my workday ends, just getting out in the yard, walking around just for a few minutes. That really helps me to level set, readjust my outlook. I do listen to podcasts. I try to listen to inspirational messages. I try to take 5 or 10 minutes at the end of every day just to reflect on what happened in the day and how I want the next day to go. So trying to constantly look to improve on interactions, on response, and just really trying to self-assess how I've behaved, how I've reacted, how I've responded, how I've interacted with others throughout the day, and being mindful that I want to improve on that for the next time around. But those are just some of the things that I do to try and be positive. I would say top is definitely just trying to get outside and experience nature.
One of the things you mentioned, I hear often, right? You said I can get outside, even if it's just for a few minutes. And I often hear people say, I don't have time. And what I often say in reverse is, time is relative here, right? It's how do you
Mm-hmm.
find that moment for if you have a minute, if you have 3 minutes, if you have 5 minutes, if you have 50 minutes, if you have 5 hours, right? There's so many
Right.
different things you can do in any of those blocks of time. But I think often we use it as a disabler instead of an enabler by saying, okay, maybe I only have 5 minutes, but going and sitting outside or walking outside for even 5 minutes, to your point, may be not only a game changer, but a mood changer and really be able to set and reset perhaps your intentions as you go back into the workday.
Absolutely. You have to be intentional about it. We talk a lot these days about intentionality. And I think you have to go into each day trying to be intentional about taking 5 minutes for yourself, just, 5 minutes to go sit on a porch step. Or, what I've done, because we've had a lot of rain here in the Georgia area, but in the summertime, I will sit in my garage during a thunderstorm and I will be on the phone or I will take calls or I'll have my laptop balanced on my lap, but just to see and smell the rain. If I can't be outside experiencing the sun or taking a walk, it just experiencing nature for me is just a treat. It's one of those things I do for my well-being. And you can find ways to do it. You just have to be intentional about it.
Completely agree with that. So let's shift a little bit, maybe in understanding a little bit about your background more. It's incredibly interesting. You've started out as a network engineer before being asked to take on a project to handle viruses and slowly doing more and more security related projects. You've also moved around industry with stints in telco and healthcare before sticking with financial services, all the way up to your transition to the CISO of Delta Airlines. You've been there, done that, if you will, both it sounds like in a skills and capability perspective, as well as gaining a lot of insight and interest in various industries. And so do you have any advice again for our listeners who either A, maybe don't know, like, how do I even get into cyber, or is cyber something for me? Or the reverse, which again I hear from quite a number of listeners, is how do I gain as much as I can from all these different experiences that ultimately end up being so rewarding for you? So maybe a little bit of insight given the fact that you've had so many different experiences in your career.
Wow, that's a very loaded question. I didn't start out with the intention of going into cybersecurity. And if you think about, the mid 90s, late 90s, it really wasn't an established field. So I was involved in technology, certainly at the time, but I didn't think that my career would go in the direction that it has. I think what I would share with people listening is stay open to possibilities because, again, you never know which direction things will turn. And I had an opportunity early in my career when I was at MCI to focus on a project that was introducing antivirus software to the organization. I never would have guessed at that moment that I would build a career around cybersecurity. It was just a really interesting project. It was something that I could really be focused on. It was a learning experience. Going into it, I knew nothing about viruses. I came out of it, maybe not an expert, but certainly intrigued. And the next project that came along, which was also somewhat security centric, I embraced. And before I knew it, I had done so many different projects in the security space that I really enjoyed learning the psychology behind why people were doing bad things with computer technology. I enjoyed looking at products that I could use or techniques that I could use to subvert some of those activities from impacting the organizations that I was a part of. And before I knew it, 20, 25 years have gone by, and it's a whole different field, a whole different industry, but certainly no less exciting or enticing as the first time that I ventured into this space way back in the mid 90s.
Yeah, and I also have quite a bit of experience. While at Deloitte the whole time, I've spent it in a variety of different industries, a variety of different capabilities. Have also watched the cyber industry grow up, if you will, and really traversed over decades. And then as we think about going forward, how much more it's going to continue to traverse and pivot when we think about the transformation that's underway continuously, right, across the market. And so I love the vantage point, but I also, when I think about it, it's interesting to me because I think we start to see people who ask the question, are all these experiences good, or is being deep in one experience, better? And I think that for me as well, the vast amount of experiences in the industries and capabilities has been, I think, beneficial, because I feel like it also opens up not only your aperture, but you learn business in a different way.
Right.
And so when I was focusing on life sciences and healthcare as an example, when I was meeting with doctors and nurses about cyber, they don't want me to geek out on cyber tech, which I can. They want me to talk to them about how they can get to surgery quicker, or how they can make sure that when nurses are logged in to be given prescriptions, that the right person is logged in at that time. And so I think understanding the facets of those industries really helps you then tune how to talk about cyber in a way that's impactful to the business, not just the tech geek side of it, which again, both are incredibly important. But I think having that broad spectrum of experience gives you a little bit of a different flavor when you think about cyber and the impact on the world, but candidly different organizations.
Absolutely. And I think it gets back to what we were talking about earlier, which is listening, right?
Yes.
So you can come at a particular industry with a background in technology. And let's be honest, technology is a great background to have because it's applicable to every industry on the planet. So we're fortunate, for those of us that have chosen to focus in the technology space, that we can move industries and be relevant. But it doesn't negate the need to listen, because what a doctor says they need to do in order to care for their patients is very different than what an airplane mechanic may say they need in order to turn an aircraft around faster. But at the end of the day, when you're in technology, you're bringing that depth of knowledge to bear on how to solve problems, regardless of the industry that you're in. But it starts with really listening to what's needed from you.
Yeah, and speaking of listening, I found a quote on you where you likened being a woman in cybersecurity to being a male nurse, and that you can be successful in either field because at the end of the day, it comes down to how well you know your subject matter, and then ultimately execute against that role. So as you mentioned, you didn't necessarily think about getting into the world of cyber, and as cyber has kind of evolved, how do you stay up to speed on the knowledge that you need to be effective? And obviously, you're in a very different role today than you were many years ago. But when you think about those roles in a traditionally male-dominated discipline, how have you kind of stayed on top of your own game?
Wow. Let's see. Let me take the female in a male-dominated industry piece first. No one ever told me I couldn't do this. And when I started in the field, I was young enough to believe that there wasn't anything I couldn't do. And I think stubbornness has aided me over the years in believing that whether you're a woman or you're a man in this industry, it doesn't matter. If you have a passion for it and you're willing to put in the time and the effort to learn what you don't know, to listen to people who have something to teach you, you can be successful. And I think over the years, that's what I've tried to do to stay current. I try to listen. There are so many experts in areas that are very relevant to my field, but different from what I do on a daily basis. So I try to stay open to listening. Reading, obviously, when I started in the field, you couldn't find a book on information security or cybersecurity. Now you can find shelf after shelf of books, or if you're an e-reader fan, obviously endless titles on the subject. But I try to read, I try to view videos. YouTube has been great in learning new things that maybe you didn't know before, particularly as we transition to cloud and cloud enablement. But yeah, those are some of the things that I try to do. Again, listening to the experts, reading as much as I possibly can squeeze into a day, viewing videos where it makes sense to do that. And then nothing replaces just hands-on experience and trying things and failing.
Yeah, and I will touch on it just for a moment, because you bring up something that I've talked about in past podcasts, and that is failing. And so I strongly believe you need failure to be successful. Obviously, as you learn from that, and you've had an underscoring theme here as well around listening. Why, again, maybe if you could hum a couple of bars on why is failure so important to you?
I've stopped even calling it failure. At some point in your life, you realize you're learning from those experiences. So is it really a failure? It may not have gone to plan, and I kind of like using that terminology a little bit better. Things that don't go to plan teach us the most and give us the greatest opportunity to sit back and really review what happened, why it happened, and what we need to change if we want a better outcome. So I've had many of those experiences.
I would say I love that, and I feel like failure's got such a negative connotation to it, even though it is just such a great opportunity to learn, so long as you're open to that, right? And it's not
right.
That's also includes learning and listening to yourself, right, from a self-awareness perspective. And so I love turning that into not only an opportunity, but obviously a very big learning experience. So I've got one more quick question before we get into what I'll call shop talk. And I see, Delta is partnering so much with work study programs in Atlanta, looking at kind of the talent of the future with high school students, particularly around cyber, and generating interest in what I know is a very short in terms of talent shortages across our cybersecurity discipline and industry. What do you think, as we think about the next generation of our cyber professionals, how can we continue to get particularly women, but our younger generation interested in cyber and continuing to obviously follow in your footsteps when we think about the role model that you provide to these young women?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we can do, but I think it starts when kids are really young and exposing girls to computer games and not just boys. And exposing girls to opportunities to build computers or go to computer camp. So it really needs, I think, to start with changing our perspective around technology and helping kids of all ages, but girls too, right? Not just boys, see that technology is something we can all engage in. And I think we also need to think about ways that we can help young women to see how technology is relevant in their life. I think about my son, my second son, who works in the gaming industry, and he was playing computer games from the time he was in the second grade. And he grew up loving computers and loving the gaming industry. And he introduced his sister to online gaming. And so my daughter, by the time she was in the 8th grade, could build a computer. No one told her she couldn't do it. And my son was telling her, look, if you want faster response in these games, you're going to have to replace this piece and that piece. And she just started doing that. So I think it starts with modeling for young kids that technology isn't off limits. to either gender. You just have to be willing to get in there and try things, right? Try a game. You don't like a game, there are other things you can do on a computer. As we get older, and when I worked in Cincinnati, I was part of an organization called 3 Generations of Women in Technology. And some of the studies that group had done indicated that if girls are not introduced by technology by the 4th grade, they will not pursue a STEM career. And this organization worked to pair 4th grade girls with high school juniors, who in turn were paired with professional women working in the IT field. And the thought behind it and the approach behind it was to introduce young girls to what was capable, what they were able to do on a computer, whether it was creating a video presentation, playing a game. But they really wanted the high school girls to introduce the grade school girls to what the possibilities were using technology, using a computer. And then the professional women mentored high school girls who were looking at and considering careers in STEM. It was a really successful model. It was something that I was very passionate about while I was working there, and I've continued to seek ways to keep young women involved in technology. Some of the things that we have done at Delta specifically, my group has paired with one of our high schools here, Cristo Rey Jesuit Atlanta High School, which does have a work-study program across all 4 years of school, of the education that the kids receive. And the kids come on site in teams of 4, and they work 1 day a week with my team. And we've been engaged with them now for 3 years, and it's wonderful to see kids that have come into our group without a thought or a care about cybersecurity, leaving at the end of the school year, having learned something they didn't know when they started, and having an interest in an area that previously they just didn't think was available to them or was something that they were interested in. And as I said, we've been doing this now for 3 years, and have had 2 of the students who have done their work study with us change their career trajectory to include cybersecurity as a focus area in college. So we're very happy with that, very proud of that. We know that we've got to do this at mass if we're going to resolve the skill shortages in our industry. One of the other things that we've done is we've reached out across IT at Delta, and we've told our colleagues, look, if you've got a high school age or a college-bound student at home who might be interested in a career in cyber, bring them in and we'll do a shadow day. So we've hosted, prior to COVID, we hosted a couple of shadow day experiences. And we've had 55 kids that have come through and spent a day working alongside the individuals in our cybersecurity team, just introducing them to what the day in the life of a cyber person looks like. And they're surprised at the diversity of activity that occurs in a cybersecurity program. So I think we've got, as professionals, lots of opportunities to engage younger generations just by opening the door and showing them, here's what it looks like. It's not always exciting. Some days are boring. Mm-hmm. There's a heavy amount of governance that underpins any cybersecurity program. But then here's the outcomes, and here's how we're changing how people view technology or how they view interacting with technology. Here's how we're enabling the business to operate in a secure manner. And what we're finding is that the kids are fascinated by this, and they want to learn more. And in some instances, they're coming to us with suggestions and recommendations on how we could do things differently or do things better. So it's been a great learning experience across the board. And I think the more we can think creatively as an industry about how to engage younger kids and show them what this looks like, what a career in this field can look like, we'll work to address that labor shortage. We may not solve for it entirely, but I think we've got a real opportunity to open the doors and maybe demystify the field a little bit. I think the other thing that we can do is make it achievable. Right now, when I speak with high school kids, they all think you need a computer science degree in order to go into cybersecurity. And so we try to highlight the background of some of my team members whose degrees are in very different fields, many of them not in computer science or information systems management at all. And we really try to underscore for them that to be really good in this field, you've got to be a good problem solver. And you have to think about problems creatively and differently. Take the handcuffs off of them, if you will, in terms of how they want to think about technology and using technology and securing technology. And you get some really creative solutions to problems.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you think about the impact of technology and cyber, particularly on young females. I find it humorous. I think my dad was ahead of his time without even knowing it. He was a senior IT executive at a defense contractor and used to bring home the latest and greatest gadgets. I mean, and those could have been quote unquote mini satellites at the time, or the latest and greatest computer. But the one thing he never brought home were manuals. He never ever brought home a book on how to do anything. And so I would just sit there and literally play with these devices until they dinged. And when they dinged, I figured I was doing something wrong and I had to get it to do what I wanted it to do without it dinging. And I'll age myself here for a second, because back in the day, if you wanted to play video games on these computers or these devices, it was move left, turn right. It was not like use your joystick or do anything. You actually had to program how you wanted these games to play. And I used to get so frustrated because literally it was like, Dad, can you just bring home a manual? Like, all I want you to do, like, I'm sure they have manuals. Can you just bring home a manual? And like I said, he was probably ahead of his time and didn't even realize it, because without those manuals, it really forced my desire and my interest. I was interested in, why did it ding? Why did it operate this way? How could I get the games to play? And that curiosity candidly drove me into being exceptionally interested in technology and STEM-oriented fields where, again, I'm not going to say I wouldn't have eventually perhaps ended up here, but it certainly built foundationally for me at a very young age, how and why I liked, kind of messing around with technology, candidly, to figure out just how to not get those machines to ding at me. So I couldn't agree with you more in terms of trying to find ways to get young girls really, really interested in this art of technology, to ultimately get them hopefully to a desire of wanting to be in tech and cyber. So again, I appreciate all that you're doing as well personally to help build that brand with our younger generation. So let's shift gears a little bit into, CISO at Delta Airlines. Huge job, and a great reputation in front of you and behind you, and really candidly the journey that you have ahead. One of the things we heard as I was thinking about, kind of the research that I've done on you, and as I think about where you've come from, and again, like I said, the journey you're looking to take Delta on in this, maybe could you give one or two snippets of, obviously, as a air traveler myself, and obviously a consumer on the consumer end of Delta, how do you think about pushing the envelope around customer experience? And I like to use the flavor of cyber being the differentiator. I think at times people tend to say, well, we'll think about cyber at the end, or we're going to look at cyber later. Don't worry about that. We've got fast development. We can't think about cyber. I like to think about cyber a little bit differently, and that it enables consumer trust, and that ultimately, if done right, can truly be the differentiator for our customer experience. And so maybe you can give a little bit about your insight about how you leverage cyber and really improving the customer experience at Delta.
Sure. When you talk about improving security and improving the customer experience, it really starts with an attitude of, we're going to build this in at the get-go. We're not going to take the approach of tacking it on. And I know that's easier said than done, particularly in legacy environments. And we certainly have our share of legacy at Delta. But as opportunities arise for us to improve upon applications the customer interacts with, or applications or infrastructure that our internal developers or team members interact with, we use those opportunities to restructure how we're leveraging security. So in some instances, we're re-architecting or we are recoding. Right now, we have a large-scale effort in place to move our technology to the cloud. So we're really leveraging that opportunity to rethink security and really enforce with our development teams, building security in as part of what they're doing, as part of the service that we're offering to the customer. But at the same time, we have to deal with the friction piece, right? So customers don't want a lot of friction in their interaction with a company. So we have to really think twice about how we secure their interaction with Delta without creating additional levels of friction. And a lot of times what happens behind the scenes, something the customer will never know about, will never see, but we know it's there and we know what it's doing to protect the information they're sharing with us. So it's kind of a combination of things, really trying to stay current with what the latest innovations in security are, being mindful about what we're trying to accomplish as an industry, as a business, in favor of making the customer's experience with us enjoyable and secure, establishing, maintaining that trust, but also ensuring that we're not introducing a lot of friction.
Yeah, and as you mentioned innovation, I know Delta is investing and rolling out a number of Internet of Things initiatives, whether that be smart airports or parallel realities, or just applications in general that are going to help better tune pilots to avoid turbulence and obviously any situations that they may encounter in the air or obviously from the ground to takeoff and landing. So as someone who travels a lot, particularly prior to COVID, I really appreciate Delta's efforts to streamline the travel experience. But at the same time, obviously, as a cybersecurity specialist, I recognize A, it's not easy, and B, it only continues to expand Delta's attack surface. So when you think about how much larger the adversary has to be able to play, if you will, with a number of these activities. And so are there certain initiatives that you and your team take into account when you're thinking of innovation and how to actually, again, you said it, you're driving cyber in at the beginning and from the get-go, which I think is critical. Are there other things that you are like, this is an absolute must when we think about innovation in cyber?
Well, I think the first thing that we try to do is at Delta, we say cyber is everyone's responsibility, right? Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. So my team does not try to be subject matter experts on all aspects of our industry, right? So when we think about the aircraft and we think of the engineering skills that are required to get a plane off the ground, we're not going to be the best people to talk to about how to secure every aspect of the aircraft. We will be good people to talk to about how to secure onboard systems, how to anticipate or risk assess what those systems could be exposed to. So we work in collaboration with a much broader group of engineers and specialists at Delta to share what we know, but also to learn what they know. And it's a collaboration that allows us to ensure the security of the aircraft as well as the data. So we work heavily with our tech ops group, who is responsible for the security of the aircraft, the onboard systems. We share threat intelligence with them. We share information on new products or services that we're leveraging in a way that they might be able to leverage and obtain value from. And it's really trying to keep communications open. Not every project that we work on is going to have a strong IT-centric thrust or pull to it. There are projects happening in other areas of the business where they're leveraging technology in very different ways, and they're reaching out to us to understand what that technology could be susceptible to from a threat or vulnerability perspective. That's where our expertise can come into play. But it's a collaboration, and it's understanding that there are aspects of technology which we in the cybersecurity space didn't grow up with or do not have tremendous skill and expertise with. But how can we share what we do know and what we are good at with those areas of our business that are focused on the use of technology in very different ways?
And one thing is, just as I'm listening to you talk about obviously innovation and integration with cyber, and kind of mission critical activities, when you think about where the synergies exist, obviously with some of the latest breaches that have occurred, we also now have to be more and more concerned, committed, aware, pick whichever word you want to put in there as it relates to third parties? Because obviously there's quite a bit of work that's done with third parties when we think about just the ecosystem in general, right? Whether there's a breach or not. So when you think about managing cybersecurity risks in the world of being much more attuned to third parties and integration, do you have any best practices you can share in terms of how you look at and view third parties, and maybe more importantly, how do you monitor them? Particularly, I'm sure you have some pretty small third businesses as well. So, is there any best practice or leading example that you think would help our listeners think about third party risk?
This is a great topic, and I will have to admit right up front, we don't have this problem solved. So I'm just as eager to hear from others who may have unique approaches in this area. I think what I've learned over the course of my career with respect to third-party risk is you have to stay in constant communication with your key suppliers. And I think the other thing that, if you want to call it a best practice, I'm not sure I would call it a best practice, but it is informing and educating your business partners that just because a particular third party they're working with has a big name or is a widely recognized brand does not mean they've got outstanding cybersecurity practices to go with that. We find time and time again, very large companies, very well-respected brands struggle to put basic cybersecurity in place. And sometimes our business partners don't want to hear that. They need to move quickly. We want to help them move quickly. And when we engage and start a third-party risk assessment, we start finding that some of the basics are not well covered. Our business partners don't want to hear that. They want to move fast. And our third parties know that we want to move fast. But we do try to be as thorough as we can when we're doing assessments on third parties. And we also try to offer advice and guidance. So sometimes you talked about smaller vendors. I call them mom and pop shops, smaller businesses that want to provide a service or want to provide a capability may not always know how to properly secure the service or capability that they're providing. So in some respects, we're offering guidance and counseling. In other respects, we're also having to wear that assessment hat and making sure that they're not introducing risk to our business that could put our stakeholders at risk. So it's kind of equal parts being an auditor in some respects, risk assessing, looking at what they're able to do, highlighting where they're not meeting your expectations, but at the same time also offering guidance and expertise where we can to help them improve their practices, so that we can confidently use their services, knowing that we're not going to be further exposed or at risk.
Sounds like you certainly have your hands full. And I think, as you mentioned, I think like many organizations, right? I don't know that this is specific to any one organization, to any one industry, to any one human, right? This is something that certainly the industry is grappling with when we think about how to manage, monitor, and really look at continuously evolving the way that we handle third-party risks. So again, I applaud the efforts that you have underway, and I think this will continue to evolve too when we think about integration with forensics and we think about integration with regulatory and legal, right? There's so many other components that start to come into play as we think about where risk and third-party management is going to be coming into. So again, I think not only you, but probably for many other cybersecurity professionals and executive leaders, I can say likely have their hands full on this topic. So
absolutely,
thanks for sharing those insights. So I've got one last question before we get into what I call one of my favorite sections, which is when we do rapid fire questions. But as you think about all the things that we just talked about, which again covered the spectrum of, if you will, not just from a talent perspective, an organizational standpoint. One thing I'd like to, kind of end in this section again is on your leadership. You obviously carry a great amount of pride in what you do, and obviously you're leading a group of a large number of individuals when you think about cybersecurity, obviously, and being the CISO at Delta. what is your bumper sticker, if you will, on leadership, and how can you help particularly young women when they think about being a leader in this space? What are the things they should look to do? Should they study? Should they try by example? Should they find mentors? What's a great way to help women gain confidence, not only in cyber but really on that leadership spectrum?
Oh, wow. Well, I think first thing that comes to mind for me is a good leader does not have to be the smartest person in the room. Good leader knows where to find the best people for specific activities. I think that's the first thing that I would tell young women is don't feel that you have to be the smartest person in the room on this topic. Be the person in the room that listens, is willing to listen to everyone else, and is willing to learn and ask questions. I think some of the smartest leaders are the ones that spend time asking questions and looking for the best way to motivate and to do things. The other thing that I would say, and again, it gets back to listening, but it's also being willing to share when things don't go to plan, right? We're not going to use the term failure, but when things don't go to plan, I think leaders have a responsibility, and good leaders share with their teams when they themselves have not had things quite go to plan, right? And what they learned from that. You talk about, as a parent, wanting to kind of shortcut your kids' learnings by sharing and trying to advise them and help them avoid making certain decisions. And they inevitably will go down that path and make those decisions anyway. But I think as a leader, that's one of the things that we can do is to help our teams understand where we've had shortcomings or failings, what we have learned from those, and what we would like to see our teams do differently to avoid having to go through those same learnings. So many things coming to mind on this topic, but those would be the things I would start with is don't feel like you have to be the smartest person in the room. Go into the room with the intent of learning, listening, and coming out of the room with a plan for what you want to do going forward. And then secondly, as a leader, being willing to be transparent with your teams and with others that you're trying to inspire, perhaps to pursue a particular career in this industry, helping them understand the decisions that you've made or the plans you had, where they fell short, how you learned from it, and what you did differently.
I love that. And again, we're going to get into what I usually like as the best part, which is my rapid fire. I've heard from prior guests that apparently it's the hardest part, which is not intended to be. I do not leave the hardest part for the end. Apparently, it's the quick answers, rapid fire, whatever first comes to mind. But apparently they're all they're very intensive, which again is not the intent. So we'll roll through a couple of these. And again, it's been great to spend the time with you today and get to hear a lot more about your background. And so. I think you talked about this in the beginning a bit, really about what does it mean to you to be a resilient leader. But I'm going to turn it on a bumper sticker for you. If you had to put it on a bumper sticker, what would resilience mean to you?
Adaptable. You have
Wonderful.
to roll with those punches.
Wonderful. And then if there is any, a standard question that I always love to hear, but I'm going to ask it, obviously, if you think about leaders or humans in general, who is someone that you look up to and why? See, I always get stumped. People stumped here.
Wow. That's a hard one. Well, I think I would start with my mom and my grandmother. My grandmother was a single mom raising 4 kids in the 40s and 50s when that was not what women did, right? She had an alcoholic husband, and she made the decision that she would be better off raising her children on her own than subjecting them to that environment. So obviously, I have tremendous respect and admiration for my grandmother. My mom, obviously raised 5 kids, stay-at-home mom, went back to nursing school in her mid-40s and became a nurse. That was her lifelong dream. And she put that on hold to raise her family and then went back to nursing school at an age when most of us would be thinking about retirement plans. And she was thinking about starting a second career. So those are the two people I most admire and respect.
I love hearing those stories. Okay, if you weren't doing cybersecurity, what would you be doing?
I wanted to be a musician growing up. So if I was not doing cybersecurity, I would probably want to go into a more creative field, music, art, something like that.
I'm curious, was it instrument or singing? What part of what were you interested
Instrument.
in? Ah,
You
well,
do not
okay.
want
Well,
to hear me sing.
which instrument? I have to ask now.
So I played clarinet and bass clarinet in school. Later took up piano and violin and flute.
Very, very cool. I actually also did piano, and then I did clarinet in middle and high school. So we have that in common as well. So good to hear. You want to carry on the music tradition there. So hopefully you still do that maybe in your spare time. But if not, certainly love. I think music and STEM candidly also tie together. So great to hear your musical aspirations. Maybe what would be something as you think about not just women in the field of cybersecurity, but diversity in the field? And I know this is a big topic that we probably could have an entire podcast on, many of them when
Absolutely.
we talk about diversity. How can people, one of the things I stress often is obviously with the continued complexity of cyber threats and just the market that we're in today, bringing as much a diverse population to the table to be able to solve for these challenges and these problems is going to be critical, not just for us today, but even more so as we continue to think forward into tomorrow. What can people do to be thinking about how to bring broader diversity and a broader diverse skill set into their work environment? But more importantly, again, how do we engage to just candidly get there? Because I think so many organizations need to continue to build upon perhaps some building blocks that they have already today in the world of diversity, but so much more to get done. And so maybe not a quick hit rapid fire question, but maybe just a thought or two on how we can do better at bringing diversity into the cybersecurity field.
Absolutely. And you're right. We could spend all day talking on this topic. I have a lot of passion around this one. I think it starts with demystifying the field, right? Right now, technology and cybersecurity in particular, we've painted this picture that a four-year college degree is an absolute necessity. And the more technical that degree, the better you're going to be in the field. And I absolutely do not subscribe to that method of thinking. I have seen some of the absolute best cyber engineers come from backgrounds in art, physical education, finance. It really comes down to problem solving. Yes, you need technical skills. Many of those skills can be learned on the job and supplemented with courses and training. But we're really in need of creative problem solvers. And what better opportunity to have diverse ways of solving problems than to reach out to people with diverse backgrounds. We all experience life challenges through different lenses, and we react to those challenges based on those lenses, based on our background and our life experiences. That's what we need to really engage in the cyber battles ahead. We need people that think differently about those problems and how to solve those problems. And you're not going to get that with a homogenous approach to the field.
I totally, again, couldn't agree with you more there. All right, well, one last question to wrap up the podcast. And again, I truly have enjoyed this conversation. Again, I feel like you and I I'm envisioning us sitting having coffee outside, of course, somewhere, and we could just keep on chatting away. So I appreciate your candor, your transparency, and really bringing your authentic self to this conversation. And so my last question is, again, when you think about the world of tomorrow, what excites you the most about the art of the possible?
I think the cloud is going to open great possibilities for security from an automation perspective. So much of the tasks that we do today are manual in nature, and I'm really excited by some of the things I'm seeing on our cloud journey that will help us to automate a lot of those tasks so we can engage our team on other activities. So that really encourages me. I wish I could say the AI piece excited me. I think the jury's out, and I'm cautiously optimistic that AI will enhance our ability to increase security. but I'm watching that one, and I'm not buying into a lot of the hype right now, so we'll see how that comes out.
Well, again, I certainly appreciate our time today, and I too am interested in where tomorrow is going to go with cloud and innovation and just continued digital transformation. So again, thank you so much for your time today, Debbie. Like I said, I feel like you and I could be sitting outside with a cup of coffee having a conversation for hours, so I appreciate it again.
Thank you, Deborah. It's been a pleasure being here with you today.
What a great conversation with Debbie. I love everything that she had to offer, including a lot of her tidbits on listening for feedback, having empathy, and finding positivity in silver linings. Everything she talked about today as it relates to innovation and cyber and building consumer trust, as well as her passion around empowering women and embedding diversity into the teams around her. Truly inspiring. If you like what you heard, stay tuned for more discussions with cyber leaders as we continue our cyber series, and to hear from some new hosts as we expand the podcast to also feature chief audit executives, chief risk officers, and other executives. Check out additional episodes on your favorite podcast channel and subscribe to our podcast at Deloitte.com/US Resilient. And feel free to connect with me on Twitter at Golden Hokie. That's GO1DENHOKIE. Thank you so much for listening.